Good morning, afternoon, night, whenever you find it most convenient to listen to the Bonfire. It's been a minute, and it is officially the offseason, right before the 2025 MLS campaign. I, as always, am on the pole with the goal, and that goal is to get ready for my choir director debut that's happening very soon. I'm very excited for it. As always, I am joined by my lovely jubbly co-hosts, DJ.
I have a brownie now.
And Tim.
I don't know where he comes up with these things. I'm going to choose to think that it's a brownie like the old Kodak camera and not a brownie, the food. Oh, no, it actually is just the food. Never mind.
He's holding in for our audio listeners, being everyone.
It has chocolate chip cookies in it. Or chocolate chips, not cookies.
Imagine chocolate chip cookies within brownies. Someone
the
write that down.
brownie's just the size of a freaking pizza.
Someone write that down. All right. So we're just going to break down some things that have happened. Of course, now that it's the off season, being MLS Cup has happened, and the LA Galaxy win their first MLS Cup in 10 years, going all the way back to there's a dynasty era spanning from 2009 to 2016. That saw Bruce Arena as the head coach. They had guys like Landon Donovan, Robbie Keane, Omar Gonzalez, and of course, David Beckham. So, the Galaxy have been they've been sort of in a similar position to the Fire. They finished below us twice in 2017 and 23. They've also tied us in 2020. And since 2016, they've qualified for playoffs twice, not including this year, and they've lost to LAFC both times, so they've turned it around rather quick in comparison to, the Fire, who have been, I guess, stuck in the same position.
Well, 3 windows, right? And they had Will Kuntz in his position for, I believe it was the middle of 2023. Was when he was brought into the Galaxy, and he had, I guess, the summer window, then the offseason and the summer window in 2024, although the team was basically in the form that it was in before the summer. So really, he turned a lot of the roster around in just 2 windows. Now, he was involved with LA a little bit before that, so he wasn't coming from zero, and he was involved in bringing some of the key pieces that helped get them to the Cup there. But, it does go to show, there's, you've got, the Galaxy this year. You had FC Cincinnati making it to the Supporter Shield last year after not, basically being eternal spoon winners, and turning it around, having one decent season and then winning the Supporter Shield the year after. It doesn't necessarily take that long, but you have to get the signings right, which, is just true no matter what.
Which one thing that will help in making the signings right, being that one of the major sources of the Galaxy's player acquisitions is currently now with the Fire in the form of Michael Stevens. Even if he can replicate a fraction of that success, with the Fire, we could become a playoff team.
That's the one thing too. Stevens coming in, there's a lot of hope for him now. With Berhalter, his sources, Stevens and his sources, and Boughton with his sources, player acquisition should be a lot better this year, hopefully. The last time the Fire actually had a good player acquisition window was 2017, for reference.
Yeah, I mean, they've certainly gotten some good players in other windows, not to minimize that, but it's also creating a vision for the club, right? Of it's not just this is a good player that we can sign or a player that we think could be good that we're going to sign. It's how does this fit in with where, the style we want our club to be playing, where we think that system. We will be at a certain, and where we think we will be at a certain point in time where it's okay to get guys earlier in their career if they're not going to be relied on to be a key contributor that season, but then it's okay to get guys that are sort of ready to go even if they're not going to be with you in 3 years. And it's timing it all correctly, which is something that the Fire have also not really hit on very well.
Yeah, definitely both sides of the key, as you mentioned. Players that are going to be developing and that will be here for many years, and players that are ready to, run from the start, but they won't be here for as long. One thing I was going to add on top of that, you have the new performance center that's opening in January, like to the fullest extent, and I know fans are going to be able to go and see it as part of the new Fire 365 thing. They're going to have some fans go to be there and like see some team training. So that's, performance center. That's going to be another thing that's going to bring players in, because that does help.
It shows the club's ambition, right? And, even I think having the stadium situation, which we'll talk about in a second, we keep on bringing up all these things. We're just like talking about the whole episode in random orders at this point. But like, it does go to show that this is an ambitious club. I think that even just bringing Berhalter in, like, I realize that Americans still don't necessarily have the best reputation in soccer, especially in some quarters. Those guys are probably not really MLS targets in the first place. So like, you're not going to get them. So it doesn't really matter. Yeah. But for those people that kind of, I think, appropriately place the United States in the position that they're in the soccer world on the men's side, the man coached a team at a World Cup, and like, how many players get to play for a coach who did that on the club level? Is not a lot. And I think it is, again, like it speaks to the ambition more than just any, what you may think about his style of play or any other given thing about, what he may or may not be doing in a given moment.
Yeah, truly. So, speaking of staff, like Berhalter, there's been some staff announcements that have happened since our last episode. One of the bigger ones being Sebastian Peltzer. He is formally moving on to Switzerland, to FC Lugano, to join Jörg Heitz over there. Michael Stevens and Greg Bodden are going to be taking over his responsibilities that he had at the club.
So Michael Stevens, by the way, just he goes by Mikey. I have confirmation from multiple sources
Mikey
on this.
Stevens.
So, yeah. Normally, someone who doesn't have their mom packing their lunch in something with superheroes on it, you don't want to call Mikey unless you check first. But no, it's Mikey Stevens.
Just because you said that, we have to if we were to ever have an interview or meet with him, we have to get him a lunchbox, a superhero lunchbox.
We need to get him a lunchbox signed by Mike McGee.
Now that I like.
Did he play with Mike McGee ever?
He did not. No, he did for, I think he played but barely, because McGee was injured a lot when he signed.
Yeah.
Interesting.
He played in Norway for a season too. There's lots of crisscrossing going on, lots of crossover episodes here. So there, and Greg Broughton, I don't know what the chances are of finding another guy named Greg with 2 G's.
Who's also bald.
Yeah.
We need one more to complete the triumvirate. So, moving on from Fire first team to Fire 2, of course, we know that Ludovic is no longer the head coach of Fire 2. Fire 2 did announce that the former Fire assistant coach and coach of the Fire reserves, Mike
Matkovic.
I'm Slavic and I'm having trouble with the names. He's going to be the new head coach following Ludovic's departure. But there's also the departure of the Fire 2 assistant coach and Fire legend Patrick Nyarko. He announced that he's leaving for personal reasons.
Nyarko is one of the most underrated players in Fire history, so this one hurts.
He did say in his statement that he would be happy to have a position with the club again. So, we don't know what the personal reasons are. Obviously, that's the point of calling them personal reasons. But it does seem like the door is open for him to return with the club in some capacity in the future.
Yeah, and this club is known for hiring alums, so he definitely has a door open.
Yeah. There's another couple. Did you want to talk about the other Fire 2 moves?
Go ahead.
They just announced some decisions around the roster. Essentially, first, some players that were signed to first team deals, largely that didn't necessarily play with the Fire too, but if they did, that's sort of where they would have been. The Fire are mostly moving on from. So the one exception to that, they're bringing in or like formally, like I guess bringing back, or I don't know how to say it. Like they've announced that they're re-signing Brian Dowd, the goalkeeper that they signed in the Super Draft last year. So he will be coming back. He was traded basically to play with Nashville's MLS Next Pro team in Huntsville, or was loaned out. They had an option to keep him. I thought they were going to pick that up. Dowd was slated to be the Fire 2 starting goalkeeper, basically until Patrick Los's emergence. So, but the Fire now have one fewer goalkeepers. They bringing Dowd back makes sense. I'm surprised, like I said, that Nashville didn't take the opportunity to like bottle him up, but there we are. And other than that, I think it's all just departures.
Yeah, you have Victor Becerra, Lawrence Wooten, and Misael Rodriguez, all of whom spent they spent time away from the Fire. Victor Becerra was with Detroit City, Lawrence Wooten was with Indy 11, and Misael Rodriguez was with Union Omaha. All of them were either declined or waived by the Fire.
Yeah. Wooten was the one that was not a Chicago area native or homegrown. He was a super draft pick. He was always going to be difficult to fit onto an MLS roster because although he is a super draft pick and went to college and is a former Big Ten midfielder of the year with Ohio State, he's actually English. He came up through Stoke City's academy system and actually was kind of in Stoke City's academy while Shaqiri was playing there in terms of like other weird crossovers that were happening.
Wow.
But yeah, being English and not having U.S. citizenship meant that he would have taken up an international spot on a team roster. And so it's like, you're really asking a lot for a super draft pick to be worth international slot. And so it was always going to be a little bit difficult. I think the Fire, I don't hate the draft pick because it is a little bit like panning for gold. And if it had worked out, like it could have worked out really, really well. But, it is what it is.
Yeah, plus with panning for gold, you never know how much gold you're going to get, and usually it's not a lot. So,
and I guess the only other thing, Victor Becerra and Alan Rodriguez, or Misael Rodriguez, both did have a little bit of time with the Fire first team. They actually made their first team debuts in the ill-fated loss to Union Omaha in the Open Cup a couple of years ago.
Sure.
And I believe it was one of John Duran's first appearances with the Fire as well.
I think it was his first start, like overall. But like
it was his first start in all comps, yeah. And I think he'd appeared on the bench, off the bench, in one match in MLS play before that. So that's kind of like a weird like they can say they were there for his first start. I believe I don't think that Rodriguez was one of the penalty takers, but Victor Becerra was and scored his penalty. Unlike the Fire's at that point leading striker Kasper Shabilko, or like normal starting striker who absolutely skied his.
Becerra took his, but Rodriguez did not take a penalty. No.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, okay, and Becerra scored his, so he can.
Yeah. So, in terms of other news, we're still waiting to hear what's going to happen with Javi Casas and Wyatt Omsberg. They're still negotiating with the team. So we'll see how long that takes. Of course, y'all know me. My fingers are crossed for Wyatt Omsberg to return to the Fire.
I know Alex Calabrese is also very much hoping for Javi to return.
Yeah, we're just really hoping for those two to come back. There's been some rumors circling around, and one is a potential move of Giorgio Koutsias to FC Lugano, which it raises a few eyebrows because for the most part, we've been seeing a lot of Fire to Lugano moves be because, they're not working out for the Fire, or Lugano, like basically one to the other because they haven't been working for one team. Hey, maybe they'll work for the other team, which is for the most part been the case, though we have seen some players be sent back to Lugano. But Koutsias at this stage moving to Lugano, I feel like that's a bit unusual.
It feels a lot like Justin Reynolds' move to me, where the Fire are basically saying, we don't want to get rid of this guy entirely, but also he's not working here. Whereas like with Espinoza and Ivanov and Shabilko, they just were not working out. Or not Ivanov, Ali Seda.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, so the Fire, when they signed Coutsi, they did lock him up long term. I think with the hope of him succeeding in MLS and then being able to sell him for a profit somewhere to Europe. I think that he's under contract through 2026 with an option for 2027. Options at the international level are untested as a legal proposition, and it's not entirely clear if that would be binding. But I think it makes sense for a variety of reasons. Really, I think that an issue the Fire had throughout 2024 was the roster was just full. So they could not make any incoming moves because there were no available slots on the MLS roster, which are small. And so I think it makes sense to move players wherever you can to create more roster flexibility. That was my read on stuff like the moves with Becerra, potentially with Koutsias departing, potentially with Wyatt departing. Like those are, I think that Wyatt Omsberg, I think is like probably going to at some point appear on like bargain best 11 sort of list, just in terms of what he gives you for what he costs in terms of like roster cap hit and stuff like that. But when you need to make a ton of moves to try to rework the roster from something that wasn't working to something that is, you just have to be willing to move on from stuff that is like okay to this could work out, which I think is the case with Coutsi. I think that they think that Koutsias has potential. I think that keeping him in the system is proof that they think that, but this is a way of them sort of like keeping the potential in the organization without taking up what like a very valuable U22 roster spot.
Yeah.
Especially when Coutsi was brought in, the Fire were kind of just like hunting around for strikers. There have been no whispers of Hugo Kuipers being a potential, movement target. Like it looks like he'll be sticking around. I'd be incredibly surprised if he doesn't. And if Kuipers is going to be the guy, and then you've got some supplemental scoring around him, like it's not really clear what role Koutsi's supposed to play on the roster.
Yeah. So other rumors that have been going around that we can confirm there are no truths to. The first one being the Aaron Long rumor. There was a rumor that he was interested or possibly coming to the club. That's already been squashed. He has reportedly, or I'm pretty sure it's actually happened, that he signed a multi-year extension with LAFC. The other one being Brian Gutierrez. He posted an Instagram picture of him in Mexico, within of a church within the vicinity of Guadalajara. And a lot of people were thinking he was going to move to Mexico. That's not the case. He's not going to Chivas.
Yeah. Never say never. But yeah.
Let me just,
he was seeing family, right?
Think, I said it, and it's going to happen. I just manifested it or something. I don't know.
Now, having said that, I think that that is an interesting question, because I think that Guti's ceiling is very high. I also think that he's a very long ways away from the ceiling, and at some point, something is going to have to happen where either he's going to be a fairly a big disappointment versus where he could be, or he will have to hit a trajectory that he hasn't hit so far with the Fire. It kind of seemed like we were sort of getting the same place with Georgi Mihailovic a few years ago when he was traded. he went and had a good year in Montreal, then went to Europe where they just never figured out how to use him, which was strange because it's like you saw his game, like, but then went back to MLS to Colorado and has been like absolutely tearing it up there. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know that that's what Guti needs. It's a different situation in a variety of ways, but, it could just be that Berhalter with a different system and some better complementary pieces around Guti could be the difference that needs to happen. But, he's still young, but to quote the great American philosopher Yogi Berra, it gets late really early with footy careers.
Nice.
It's also worth noting Guti is under contract through 2028, so there's going to be a pretty high price if he moves.
Yeah, he's also, it's a U22 deal that you have to be U22s have to be U22 initiative slots have to be your first deal in MLS unless you are basically a homegrown, in which case you can sign a second deal and you're allowed to get paid significantly more than like the roster max hit. And with what Guti's making, there are very few clubs in the world that could really afford to pay him as well, let alone more than what he's making, especially for the number of minutes you'd be giving him. He would be one of the better or best paid players on most Eredivisie rosters. He would be a extremely well paid player in like lower league English football, like the Championship or somewhere else. Chivas is like one of the only clubs that would sort of make sense in terms of being able to pay him more than he's making now, because why would he accept less? And pay a transfer fee for the Fire, and they are still tying their shoelaces together with their we only sign Mexicans recruitment policy, even if they've expanded the definition of Mexicans so much that I'm pretty sure they're going to start passing out Chivas eligibility at Taco Bell soon. But like,
that's funny.
So that's why it isn't the craziest thing in the world. It's just, I don't think any move is imminent. And like I said, like even Chivas, I think that you can look at the potential, but I'm not really sure what he would give them based on what he's done lately.
Yeah. So, one of the last, I guess, in terms of player movement topics to talk about is David Pareba. He has reportedly signed a first team deal. The 2024 MLS Next Pro MVP is the second player to be promoted to the first team from Fire 2 following Justin Reynolds. Of course, now the question still remains who else could possibly join him, being Omari Glasgow, since he is out of contract this year.
Glasgow, it would not shock me if Glasgow signs with the first team, but it also really would not shock me if he signs somewhere else, if he thinks he can get more minutes.
So, going back to David Pareba, I can confirm that there has been interest from the team in them signing a first deal. I would be surprised if it was not official around the time that this comes out or shortly thereafter. Omari Glasgow, he would have to get a first team deal for him to stick around, I think, in a Fire uniform. Whether or not, we just talked about like the team moving on from Georgios Koutsias, who doesn't play really exactly the same position because Glasgow typically plays sort of wider. But again, like, I don't know, taking up an international spot, the sort of like questioning, like what does Omari Glasgow give you at the MLS level? Because he looked like he belonged in MLS, but he didn't stand out during his 2 appearances with the Fire this year. So it's a difficult question. Like, and it's unfortunate because the team did work really hard to get him to Fire 2, and that was a good spot for him. Mm-hmm. It just isn't obvious that like right now with where the team is and the roster needs and the needs to get, like I said, like just flexibility, like the ability to bring in bodies at different spots. I don't really know how that's all going to work out.
What are the odds the Fire sign him to slot 31 and just loan him to USL though?
So that's the thing. Like right now he holds all the cards. He and his agent, during the last 6 years of your deal, you're allowed to negotiate with clubs anywhere in the world. And I'm sure that there have been discussions between him. I mean, the fact that he, even though the Guyanese national team was not exactly a high profile program, the fact that he has done so well with them, and that there are, players like that team has a lot of players that are like basically, British that have Guyanese heritage and are playing on that team. That I think that gives him access to different kinds of profiles of people that could be looking at him than he normally would have in other circumstances. And so again, like it's just, if he was signed to a new deal, in his place, I think that he would probably want reassurances that there was a plan in place for him to play in MLS and not just send him to USL, which is a higher level than Next Pro, but like also not, notably not like as good as MLS. When he probably has options at a number of leagues in Europe that would be willing to pay him, although again, like the thing is that, MLS contracts for a lot of players at that spot in their career can be more lucrative than what they would make elsewhere. And life is uncertain, and you should take every dollar you can in the business. So
get your money up, not your funny up, honestly. So the last thing to mention before we go on to sort of what to expect for the off season, we had two Greg Berhalter town halls. There was one that was online where he, was a lot of questions about the team, and he did clarify a few things. And the other one was for supporters at the Fire Pitch. I was at the one for the supporters at the Fire Pitch. I was able to play my saxophone along with Sector Latino and the other musicians, which was very fun, including one part where Berhalter said a joke about Miami, and I just went da 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 with my sax, and he thought it was funny, and so did the rest of the room. So I really like that. At the other town hall, the one that was online, he did say 5 players are locked in as starters, which leaves 6 up in the air. He mentioned
it's that kind of advanced math that you can expect from the level of analysis we can give you.
Pretty much.
1 + 1 = 3, right?
We can count all the way to 11. Just don't ever ask us to count higher than that.
Don't. If you do, we will have a mental breakdown. He mentioned that Acosta and Mueller are sort of leaders for the club. Brady, Guti, and Reynolds, they're promising homegrowns. Haile Selassie is a wild card. Kuipers as a potential top 5 striker in the league. He was also incredibly positive about Fede Navarro.
I'm going to be honest. It kind of shocks me that he's talking about Mueller as a leader, considering it's not exactly a secret. Mueller has massively regressed after his injury, so that's going to be interesting to see what happens there.
Physically, yes, but maybe mentally, because I feel like if you follow Chris Mueller, he's very much a philosophical person. I mean, I read his book that I actually have right up here talking about, the epic ups and downs of playing professional soccer. So I feel like if he was to be a leader, it would definitely be more of a mental, someone who has got the mentality for it, maybe not the physicality or the on-field physicality for it just yet.
More like Logan Paul's, basically.
Yeah, so one thing that I, talking to crew reporters that were around when Berhalter was there, Berhalter is certainly a very well thought out person, and I think he's very deliberative with a lot of what he says. Mm-hmm. So there's always multiple reasons to talk about a player. I think that Mueller's leadership abilities are probably his strongest asset right now. Which just because, as you said, like he hasn't had that dynamicism on the pitch that he had before the injury. Some guys get it back. It takes time. Like you can get good enough to play, but not really fully recovered for about a year afterwards. And so that's a possibility with Mueller. There's also the possibility that, like, realistically, he is just on a very expensive contract. And, where would you move someone like that, right? To me, the bigger news is Fetty. And from talking to people around the team, it seems like Fetty is, I had thought that for the same reason that I talked about with Koutsias, where it's nothing against him as a player. And I still really believe in the, ceiling that Kutsi has, and even higher for Fetty. I think that Fetty has shown things in flashes that we have not really been able to see just because of the way that he's been used. But I thought, just to give the team more flexibility, and because I thought he was potentially sellable back to a club in Argentina, that he may get moved on. And it seems like that's not going to be the case.
The question right now, offset question 2, is one player that did not get mentioned was Gaston Jimenez, it seems.
Yeah, I don't think that anyone would be surprised if he moves on. Now, the thing that has always been difficult with Gaston Jimenez is that he came in on a deal that overpaid him for what his production was. And it was not a short-term deal. I think it was 3 years initially. Then he was signed to another deal that kept him as a DP. Then he was signed to a third deal. And like the basically what the team ended up doing was exchanging higher payment for longer term, so that Gaston was promised more money over the course of a number of years in exchange for a deal that would allow him to be bought down and be a TAM player, not a DP. Because of that, he's promised money into the future, and that just makes it hard for the team to move on. He gets to the end of the deal, even if a team in, say, like Argentina or somewhere else, and he's been linked with a couple teams in Argentina. One, I think, was clearly a work of fiction by somebody trying to make things up. Another, I think there may have been some reality therefore. If he was moving to a team now, part of it would be that he doesn't have a lot of term left on his deal. And so the same thing as before, longer term security of knowing what he'll make in 2 or 3 years, I think is worth potentially making a little bit less money per year for the next year or two.
For reference, this is the last year of Jimenez's contract. Like, after this year, he's out.
He's free. So the last little bit of update before we get to what to expect for the offseason is honestly one of my favorite things to always talk about, and that is the stadium update. The Fire, based from what we've heard in the last few town hall meetings, as well as just reports from other sources and news outlets, the Fire are very focused on either the 78 developmental area or Lincoln Yards for the new stadium site. I remember reading an article that was saying that the Fire are more likely to get the 78 the area ahead of the White Sox, because of the fact that Mansueto would be using his own money while the White Sox are wanting to use public funds.
Yeah, I think that Cranes has been reporting on it. They unfortunately, based on what I can tell, don't really have a lot of better sourcing than we do on it. Mansueto was pretty open about what the team wanted to do. I think that Cranes were guessing, but I think they were correct when they said that the focus is on the 78 and Lincoln Yards is the backup that they can use kind of as a negotiating tactic. There already once was a stadium proposed for the site on Lincoln Yards. Initially, it was going to be a USL stadium that, ironically, the Ricketts were going to build. They briefly held like the rights for USL, what would now be championship team in Chicago. And I say ironic because now, of course, the Ricketts, Laura Ricketts is the principal, like the operating owner of, I guess, the now Chicago Stars. And I'm just never going to call them that.
Red Stars.
Yeah. So she is the operating owner of the Chicago Red Stars. And they obviously have talked about how their stadium isn't working out. The stadium was nixed early on from the Lincoln Yard plans because of concerns over traffic and other related issues. It seems like it was intentionally put there almost as a sacrificial lamb. where it's like, if you look at a bunch of like tall apartment buildings and you're like, oh man, that's going to be traffic. That's going to like change the skyline around my house. I don't like that. But then when someone's able to say, oh, well, actually and don't worry about the stadium, we took that away. I think that makes it easier to do what they wanted to do initially with Lincoln Yards.
I will say this: I hope they go to the 78 just because I don't want them to be closer to the Cubs.
The 78, it's a much more likely location for a number of reasons.
Yeah.
It's also like literally this site is like a mile and a half away from their new training facility, so it's ideal from that way. It's closer to multiple L lines. Lincoln Yards is not entirely unlike Soldier Field, where it's like the Brown line's kind of close, but like for a place that is like located sort of that centrally to so much, it's surprisingly not that great of a transit location. And I just think that the chance, if you want to see the Fire in a new building soon, and I'm sure that this is one of the calculations that Fire HQ is making with Joe Mansueto and the team working with him on this, like, if you propose a stadium in Lincoln Yards, you're going to get someone to sue you saying that you're doing something wrong or the city did the wrong thing and giving you the land in some way just to try to slow things down because there's going to be some NIMBYs that don't want a stadium around. I think the chance of that in the 78 is a lot lower. And I think that that's part of the calculation.
I also heard that there's a possibility that there can be two stadiums in the 78, that there can be both a soccer specific and a baseball stadium, as sort of like how some cities have like two stadiums right next to each other and they share parking lots and facilities. That could be a possibility.
The site is big enough to house two. To whether that's the best use of the land, I don't know. There are certain synergies with that, like you said, with parking and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you say that because that came from the Sox, who were sort of like, oh, don't worry about this, soccer team talking about stuff. There's enough room for us too.
Yeah.
To me, the big question is if you fit both stadiums, they would kind of have to be aligned north-south, with one closer to Roosevelt Road, the other further south from that. If you're picking, you want to pick the north end of that, right? Because it's closer to the L, it's closer to, a lot of other transit options. It's closer to the city. You don't want to have to be the one that has to walk past someone else's stadium to go to the game that you're going to. Mm-hmm. And so I think that that's the thing that I'd be paying attention to. Sure. Now, the team has, I think, tried to delay expectations around the timeline with this, saying that it was going to be, potentially a couple of years before they knew or they said anything else. I think is going to be quicker for the announcement. Although obviously in Chicago, especially with the possibility of somebody suing to try to get something not built because NIMBYism, it's going to be years and years before it happens. But I think if we get an announcement, say like in the next year, the Fire could be playing in a new home by the end of the decade.
This is fantastic news. So I think it's high time we talk about essentially what to expect with this off-season calendar. DJ, would you be able to go through the off-season calendar since you probably know a bit more how it works than I do?
Of course. Excellent. So today, the day we're recording this, it's December 9th. Today we already had the half-day trade window where the Fire didn't do anything, so that's not pointless. On the 11th, this Wednesday, we have the expansion draft. Tomorrow night, which probably will be the day this is released, the Fire will announce their list of players that are available for San Diego to draft. I will say this right now, do not read into the list, because the Fire have a history of protecting players who are trade objects and allowing players who they know are not going to be picked. For example, there's no reason to protect a guy like Brian Dowd, because realistically San Diego is not going to pick him. After that, on the 12th, free agency opens.
One other quick thing about that. Homegrown players are automatically protected. nobody else's, including DPs. It wouldn't be entirely shocking if around the league a couple DPs were left unprotected. I would be a little bit surprised if Gaston Jimenez was on the protected list. If he was, that would make me think that the team was close to a sale that was not going to cost them money. I would be shocked if Hugo Kuipers was protected, even though I don't think that he really would be necessarily a super high San Diego target, because like that profile of a guy at that salary, you'd think that they'd want their own choice and not somebody else's. And also some players may have no movement clauses, which we don't know the details of anyone's contracts, but it would not surprise me if he had a no movement clause in his deal, in which case the team would need to use a spot to protect him.
One thing I think is also worth mentioning, the Fire, I believe it's 13 players have to be protected. They have up to 13 or 11. And the Fire, factoring out the homegrowns who are Guti, Reynolds, Brady, and Orahel, the Fire only has 17 players that could be listed in any way, shape, or form. Not including, like, obviously that. Because homegrowns,
it's going to be awkward.
Homegrowns don't count at all towards it. Like, they don't count towards the protected list at all. They're just, they don't exist to San Diego.
Yeah.
But on the 12th, free agency will open, so Dave's really starting to listen to Wyatt Omsberg, seeing what he's going to do. And also the end-of-year waivers. The Fire have never done anything with end-of-year waivers. They've selected 3 players, Giuseppe Gentile in 2014 and Christian Martinez Marco Reina in 2019, to point out how much they love the waivers. If you remember anything about those players' times with the Fire, you're autistic like me. But yeah, so I wouldn't expect the Fire to do anything with that.
They may this year. I mean, it would be a little bit surprising, but again, these are players that typically have option years or things like that where the team didn't want to pick up the option. Another MLS team can pick up the option at basically the already negotiated rate, and if the player don't like it, the player can lump it, is the way that MLS treats it. It hasn't been tested internationally, so like Fafa Picault is out of contract. He's technically a free agent. You know, he could sign anywhere, but I'm trying to think of someone else who had an option declined.
I believe Pizarro is actually on the waiver draft this year.
He is eligible for waivers, so another team could pick him up. Or Emmanuel Boateng, I think would maybe be a name to watch. He had an option year that was not picked up by his team, so another team could pick it up, and basically Boateng would have nothing to say about it. Like, he would, according to MLS, need to show up. Now, again, if he wanted to sign outside of MLS or something like that, that has not been tested, whether or not option years are legal at the international level per FIFA. So you never know.
Bureaucracy.
But yes. On December 13th, it's reentry draft stage 1. Stage 1 is the one where if you pick up a player, you have to immediately either exercise their option or offer them like a bona fide offer within, I think, a week. And the Fire have only ever picked one player from that, and that's Maicon Santos from 2012, who had one good game and then fell off entirely. On December...
That's just the Fire speed run.
Exactly. Ironically, it was against the New York Red Bulls, too.
Wow.
He was the guy that gave Frank Lopez, I think, his first win against the Red Bulls. So, good job, man.
Congratulations.
On the 19th, it's reentry draft stage 2, where you basically just pick up the rights to the player. The Fire only used this twice for Corey Gibbs in 2010, which was a success, and Kelly Doob in 2011, which he was picked up, he was signed, and then immediately released 6 months later. So, yeah. It is noteworthy. Berhalter did use the reentry draft stage 2 in 2016 to draft Josh Williams to the crew, which was a major success. And after that, on December 20th, we have the Super Draft, where the Fire are third in every round. They have not traded any picks, I think. So
they still could, of course, between now and then, especially with some of the other free agency things going on. Like trading draft picks for a player's rights is, a tale as old as time.
They could also just trade down and get rent more picks / money.
Yeah, I mean, the amount of GAM you get is fairly minor, but like I said, like the Fire are like looking for like flexibility with a cap, so that wouldn't be crazy. They traditionally have not overly prioritized the Super Draft. They now have a better scouting team around college prospects, and like every year, it's not a ton, but every year you see a few players that end up having very successful careers in MLS or like even beyond. Some of whom, look like they could be sold for millions of dollars to a club somewhere in Europe that are picked up from the Super Draft. So, it's a little bit like playing the lottery, but like also you kind of ignore it at your own peril.
It's probably worth noting the last time the Fire actually signed multiple players from the draft was 2018. So it's been a while since they've actually had a lot of players come in from the draft. But I think now most of the time, if they have a player come in, they go directly to the second team.
Yeah, I mean, and that's going to be a more and more common option. I mean, that's even like Duncan McGuire is a very good recent example of a guy that like made it to, I think, a lot of success in MLS and had, links with going to Europe. Ironically, Greg Boughton was the guy that was targeting him in England. That didn't pan out because of paperwork reasons. I know it's a small world. So I guess what I'm saying is Duncan McGuire to the Fire. No. But, I think that it's, especially because Greg Berhalter, I think, does have a stronger knowledge. I think that the Fire have better scouts in place for the Super Draft. It wouldn't surprise me if we saw somebody make it to the first team from the Super Draft, but it's still probably less likely than more likely that it would be a direct move.
All right. Well, that's pretty much all we have for y'all.
Well, actually, other breaking news that this hasn't been officially announced. I would expect that the roster, like that the schedule is going to get released in the next week or two. It really looks like we're back to the first games happening that last weekend in February. So trying to figure out when that would be, looking at my calendar, but just based on some things that have hit my inbox literally while we've been recording this.
That's awesome.
So that would be at maybe the 22nd of February. That Saturday would be a one, or, maybe they could hold off till the 1st of March, but with the Club World Cup happening and the teams probably going to have to vacate some places for practice and stuff like that, if nothing more, it would not at all surprise me if it was the 22nd of February.
It's another interesting year with Club World Cup.
One thing I've also heard that might be of interest is that the League's Cup may not be featuring every team in it this year. Only the top 18 teams in MLS.
Yeah, and I would expect that we would get an announcement about that in the next week or two if that was going to happen. I've heard some similar rumors. There have been some things publicly reported, some things just from conversations with people. I know it's something that's been contemplated. A lot of this is MLS is looking desperately for ways to be more flexible ahead of 2026 because they know they're going to have to pause for the World Cup. And so expect there to be some experiments towards that in 2025. And then 2026 is just going to be like, I don't know, who knows? I'm sure that they've got a team of people that are working on it. I'm glad I don't have their job.
Me too. So, I'm pretty sure now that we have gone through everything we need to. Thank you, Tim, for that last minute update. So, I can't wait for the schedule release. That way we can sort of sort our calendars. I really want to try to get to an away game. I haven't been able to last season, of course, because of conflict. So, I would love to get to an away game or 2, maybe even 3, depending on how my life's going. So, any final words of wisdom from our lovely jubbly co-hosts, DJ and Tim?
Do not believe everything you see on Instagram as an immediate rumor, people.
That's definitely true. Yeah, media literacy, man. Learn how to be media literate, and you will be a lot happier throughout your life.
Amen. I say to that.
Make sure you know how to literature the media.
Yep. I, as always, have been Alan the Pole with the goal, joined by my lovely jubbly co-hosts, DJ and Tim. For this off season, for next season, and all the other seasons. Come on, you men and women.
Almost.